Any question we have? Mineral Wilson is supposed to use visual interests. Yeah, which is kind of interesting because it's the one who promotes stuff like that. But it's kind of like weird the alliances people make, right? Like Stalin and Hitler were allies. Their ideologies were completely antithesis, and yet they were willing to make an alliance. Right? That's the one of the alliances. Woodrow Wilson, he's promoted self-determination, the League of Nations, a lot of ideals that people in historical hindsight really, really like. But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if Woodrow Wilson blocked the nation anymore. What's popular? Clay, yeah, mainstream support. We'll discuss that a little bit more in the Biden, when we go through the Biden. Right now, let's go to the 1980s and wars in Central America and Africa, where American mercenaries, many of whom have sympathies with this white power movement, are starting to play a role. Okay, so we start to see paramilitary praxis in the 1980s. So we start to see the role of mercenaries. So what is a mercenary? First off, let's talk about what a mercenary is. Yeah. Basically a soldier. Yeah, a soldier for hire. Um, I call him a soldier of fortune. We're going to talk in this lecture about Soldier of Fortune magazine. This is not to imply that every good Soldier of Fortune magazine is racist. That's not it. There is an overlap. Right? But we want to be careful of pointing too much to overlap, right? Like, because then we can label anybody who think. On the left, point to one extremist and say, well, that person represents all left leaning. And on the right, we point to one extremist and say that represents all right wing. When the vast majority of Americans actually have this incredible amount on those policy issues. We have a first past the post electoral system. What does that mean? That means you're stuck with the two-party system. Third-party candidates will always either win and become one of the first or second parties, as in the case of Abraham Lincoln. Right? That happened once. We also got rid of the waiting system. That was when we had the waiting system. Or third-party parties just died. Here's the thing: whoever gets the most votes wins. There are no points for getting close. Kamala Harris got a lot of votes. How much political power did she get? Zero. It's first past the post system. Donald Trump wins by a single vote. He wins the whole thing. Okay. So what that does is that lends itself to a two-party system. There's a famous South Park episode. Anybody ever seen the episode? They make fun of this. They parody this. It's like the kids have an election for a school mascot. The election comes down to a douchebag and a turkey sandwich. You have to vote for one or the other. And he says something, they're making fun of two parties say something like, I'm always the Democrats trying to vote for one or the other. Right? It's a metaphor, right? They're making fun of the two party system. There are often alternative systems. Systems are alternative systems. And in parliamentary systems, parties survive and thrive. Let me give you some examples. In the United States, the Green Party is like the outlier. But in Europe, the Green Party might get 5 to 10% of the vote. And here's how it works. You vote on party. Say, so I'm going to vote Green. Well, only 5% of the population voted Green. Well, they got 5% of the seats in Congress. See how that works? 5%. What's the difference in Congress right now between Democrats and Republicans? Not much. So imagine I was in the Green Party and I had 5 seats in Congress. I'm a kingmaker. I can decide which party actually controls. And then imagine this parliamentary system further, and the prime minister is president, as we think of it. He's elected from inside the Congress. All of a sudden, the Green Party has a lot of political issues. Or that anti-immigrant party in Germany. Something like that. The parties can survive in parliamentary systems, they tend to die out. Two-party systems. That does not mean that there's not significant political change. I would say the Republican Party saw change. 2016, we completely changed the nature of the law. Between Democrats and Republicans on foreign policy, there was almost zero difference for my entire life until Donald Trump did. Now there is actual genuine difference. If you look at the consequences for Ukraine of Donald Trump being elected are pretty dire. Now, if you think we're spending too much money in Ukraine, that's a valid policy. I'm not judging. You're saying that's $65 billion that we spent over the last 3 years, which was the show budget, whatever. It's a very small amount of this budget. But okay. If you think that was too much, then yeah, it's valid policy. I love watching the Russian personal back. That was like my every day. It's like this is our enemies are being beaten, and we're standing up for freedom. Because you can't roll an enemy together. Set that precedent. 1,000 more. But you make the liberal way, that's fair. Mercenary is a soldier for hire. Someone who was hired to fight. Who protects the Pope? Is Papa. What's that? Actually, don't hold that. Punish blood for this first. They also punish my heart. Anybody know who they are? They dress up funny. They don't always dress up funny. For the ceremony. They also kill them. They're tough guys. Anybody? Never heard of this? The Swiss Army. They dress up in this, like, when they're protecting the Pope, they're like these very serious guys. They kind of look like the British beef eaters, like they're wearing the funny hats and they're in this red. They're in a blue and yellow and like orange uniform. And they're carrying like Lisbon pikes from like the medieval period. But don't worry, this guy's behind you, like sniping. Carrying in plain clothes wearing regular guys. And it's the Swiss Army. There's this old tradition in Italy that the Pope was always protected by the Swiss Guard. So when I was in the Vatican one time, the tour guide says, the reason why they pick the Swiss Guard is because if you pay a Swiss man enough, he will give his life for you. But there is no amount of money you can pay an Italian to make him give his life for you. I mean, the Italians didn't trust each other to provide security. So if the Pope wanted to make sure he was secure, they had to hire these Swiss mercenaries. And you got to remember, he used to be like the governor. He used to be like the mayor of Italian city-states. He had real political power. That didn't end until Italian unification in roughly 1870. And they had to negotiate a series of treaties with the fascist government to determine what that city was. And technically, it's a very tiny independent country inside of Rome, protected by mercenaries. What do we call mercenaries today? Contractors. Private military contractors. So that's the logic you'll hear of them being awarded back in the war in Afghanistan in the last 20 years. Contractors. It's a lot better than mercenary, right? Mercenary has kind of like that house. Oh, PMCs, private military contractors. But there were mercenaries who went out and fought with foreign governments that aligned with U.S. foreign policy. And so we were kind of there. Let me give you an example. In Central America, in the 1980s, there were these right-wing governments that were pretty aggressive. In El Salvador, they were forcing families. And in El Salvador, for example, when the people rose up and had like mass protests for a democratic government, they took pictures of all the people in those protests, and they started escalating, started to basically killing those people. El Salvador fell into a really nasty civil. 60 bodies a day were being killed every single day. And it was so bad, they killed 6 American nuns. Nuns. Little ladies in habits, including them on baby. There was a guy who was part of the Avena party, the right-wing party. They called it De Amazon. They called him Blowtorch Bob. I'll let you imagine how we got that name in the first time. And it was really nice. Jimmy Carter, Jimmy Carter said, I'm not saying killed 6 Americans. He's gone. Reagan came in and he had one foreign policy. For better or for worse, he had total clarity. All anti-communism. This is the Cold War. We're taking it to the Soviets. Anywhere where there's no they are trying us. There was a famous line about Saddam Hussein. He's the son of a bitch, but he's ours. And we knew we were supporting somebody who was pretty nasty in the 1980s. In the context of Iran and Iraq. But to a certain extent, that all played into political politics. I don't think we actually just do that, but it's anymore. So we started supporting the right-wing government in El Salvador. But this was also playing out in Guatemala. This was also playing out in Honduras, where we had massive areas. Did I ever tell you guys about our? Did I lecture on this on El Salvador, the counterinsurgency operations in El Salvador? We already talked about that in this class. Okay, we won't recover that. The bottom line here for this class is there were a bunch of places that we were supporting, but the Democrats in Congress had the memory of Vietnam in their heads. And the idea of creep. Does anybody know what mission creep is? So it starts like this. You start off doing one small thing. And then to do that small thing, you gotta do something else. And then to do that thing, you gotta do something else. Pretty soon you're doing a lot of stuff in a place that you want to do one small thing. So let me give you an example. We did we sent in advisors after the French fell at the end to support the South Vietnamese. Just some advisors. Pretty soon that expanded to, okay, well, they need air support. But if you want to have an air support, you need a base, and you're going to need to protect that base, so you're going to need some Marines around that. And then eventually you're going to need some Army in the background to provide the logistics for the Marines. And then pretty soon you're going to need more air power to do Operation Rolling Thunder in 1965 to do that bombing campaign. And then pretty soon you're going to need to protect all those guys, and pretty soon you're just in the war in Vietnam. And all started with a few guys. So the U.S. Congress was really wary of this. And it was Democrats and Republicans, but mostly Democrats. We also knew that where the leftists had succeeded in taking power, the CIA wasn't taking no for an answer. So when Nicaragua, the Sandinistas came to power and took power. They were socialists. They were allied with the Soviet Union. And we didn't like that. So we started a thing called the Contras, meaning counter. Contra means counter, right? To fight something. The beauty of Spanish is that it has 10,000 borrowed words. The beauty of English is it has 10,000 borrowed words from French, which is Romance language, which is just like Spanish. So, insurgency, insurgencia. Counterinsurgency, contrainsurgencia. Revolution. And on and on. The more elevated the conversation in Spanish, the serious it is one. This is easy. If you're asking like, hey, you pass me the cup from here to there, give us a hint, it reflects it's not live. Reflexive verbs that let them like, right? Like, if you want to just it is. It happens. Gotta have pronunciation now. So we started sponsoring these insurgencies against socialist governments. And it was through the CIA and it was through covert action. So the idea was that we would have plausible deniability. Even inside the CIA, I talked to CIA officers, but anything we do will eventually become law. We may deal in secrecy, but we know inevitably become law. This is a free and democratic society. Stuff comes out eventually. And the U.S. government passes Boland Amendment 1 and 2, and possibly 3 in the 1980s. And basically, what this is, hey, CIA, you know, what you do down there, you can stop. No more supporting the country. Now, my advisor was U.S. State Department. This is my advisor for my dissertation. Great guy, I think 6 or 7 cents. So he was U.S. State Department, and his godfather inside the State Department was Chris Argos, the U.S. ambassador to Honduras, where we had a major air base. Now, Argos wanted to keep an eye on CIA. The State Department was keeping an eye on CIA. So my advisor was the only guy who could make the CIA spooks in Nicaragua nervous. So like the CIA guys, like they're like kind of like arrogant. CIA. Why? You can get away with anything. You can't tell us what to do. They see my advisor, but they're still packing their notes. My advisor. He was the only one who could make them nervous. And when they got yanked out of Congress, the only person, the only American who was still with the an eye on him, my advisor. When they came to a negotiated settlement, the Satanese government, they handed over their weapons and they were surrounded protections and all this. He was there when they handed over their guns. He watched it. And they handed over a bunch of 19th century antique guns. He's like, "Spare your guns." And they're like, "Yeah, we know. We just need insurance policy. In case they decide to come kill us. We can go to grab it, find out." They never did. They kept their insurance policy. So they turned over a bunch of 19th century guns. That was my reason. Collapse. During this whole period, there were a bunch of Americans who were really into guns, but weren't regular U.S. Army. Some of them had been former soldiers, some of them were just kind of like whites. Some of them were white supremacists. And they were the ones that went down there and were supporting and consulting and providing training to some of these right-wing governments. It was all part of an anti-communist ideology. Some of them were just bored, guys like Tom Posey. He joined the Marines in 1966. He was a racist. He was in Alabama. He was from Alabama, and he attacked a civil rights demonstration. So, what were the cultural precedents? The John Birch Society. John Birch. Anybody heard of John Birch? Has anybody heard of Koch brothers? Oh man, this is like there's no cultural reference point in what is 5 to 10 minutes. Okay. Alright. The Koch brothers were these wealthy billionaires. And Koch Corporation, KOCH. And they have business interests in everything. Right? Like trucking, all kinds of multi-billion-dollar corporation. Two brothers inherited a bunch of money from their dad, but expanded that money and very successful businessmen. They would actually sponsor. They were like conservative movement trying to spread conservative ideology out of college campuses. Actually, touched NBC State here. One of the professors in the department, he's no longer with us here. His wife's an NBC State. Wasn't he left? He was a great guy. But he was able to apply for grant money to bring in speakers to pay for their travel costs and stuff. And it was to the Koch Foundation. And the Koch Foundation would give money at the university to bring in speakers who talk about freedom and free markets. The Koch brothers, these billionaires, were the sons of John Birch. Or the guy who founded the John Birch Society. Now, the John Birch Society liked free markets, was anti-communist, and liked freedom. They also were a little bit racist and meanist. when the Koch brothers took over from the John Birch Society, they stripped out the racist stuff and they went back to just remarks. That's what they were doing. So the school newspaper found out that there was money from the Koch brothers to bring in speakers, and actually turned into this big controversy thing. It was kind of a mess. But it was like, I'm gonna from all this. But like I'm kind of I get them to fund the things that I like. For example, like I tried to get them to fund they were all excited when we stopped doing the grant. They were all excited. I was like, well, how about Australia and Mexico? I got a journalist who covers Mexico who veterans from the state of herself, not being particularly well enough for the Mexican government. It's great. Let's see, liberals and Republicans here in a lot. They were fun with that. And counter. So it's like some things turn political, they don't need to be political, and it turns into a problem. Okay. Cultural antecedents. So the John Birch Society gets going. It's the 1950s. Its heyday is the 1950s. And I'll never forget my mother's relative on my grandma. He was a member of the John Birchers. And one day he said something, and she's like, "You sound like some John Bircher." And you go, "Well, I have things to say." She's like, "Oh, he's gone into the John Bircher's things. They would out their pamphlets. And it would be this thing, this stuff. You'd be like, "Ah, you're rich bad, this, that, all that, yeah." And that has a long tradition in the United States. There used to be a party in the 1800s called the Know Nothing Party. And they would call themselves that because if you went up to them and you asked them what political party, they would say, "I know nothing," as if it was like something secret that they were part of the know nothing. It was like they knew it was secretly bad, racist, right? Like even in the 1800s, but they were very nativist party. They were anti-immigrant, all. No nothing party. So there was a cultural antecedents to some of this stuff. So the John Birch Society was anti-immigrant. You'll hear people who scream about the United Nations. I always find this kind of humorous. They're like, "The United Nations is becoming a world government, taking over our sovereignty." I'm like, what is the United Nations? No. Look at the United Nations Charter. Read. It acknowledges the sovereignty of all nations there. The only thing that they're party to this thing. So what is sovereignty? The right to do as you see fit in your own nation's borders. Now, the only place that they have set something up that can be binding is in the Security Council. And in the Security Council, 5 countries have vetoed over what the Security Council does and what theoretically countries can demand it to do within the United States, China, the United Kingdom, the Russian Federation, used to be the Soviet Union, and France. The winners of World War II. So if the United Nations did anything that the United States didn't like in the Security Council, the only place where it's binding, what would happen? We would veto it. So where's the sovereignty violation? And the things that actually limit sovereignty, like promoting human rights, like you can't commit genocide against your own people, we see those treaties separately under the Genocide Convention. No, ethnic cleansing is bad. No, you can't murder your own people. Stuff like that. Right? Those are things you read a lot of those treaties. Sometimes we see really good treaties internationally, and we're the ones who initiate them, and so law of the sea. We set up an entire legal system of international maritime law. We never signed because it wasn't in our interest. We can basically have our cake and eat it too. We'll follow which rules we want to follow, not the other ones. Landmine treaty. Landmines are nasty. Because you leave behind it at any place. And then some poor little kid is playing in the aftermath of the war zone. Freaking landmine finally goes off and blows off his leg. Kid's like an amputee walking around with crutches. The rest is like, we use landmines in warfare. Just get rid of it. US idea. Let's get rid of it. There's one thing. Right the street. It's a great idea. Let's eliminate that. Everybody signs on to it. Look at the United States. The United States goes, we got a lot of problems. North Korea, South Korea, the DMZ, we got that place loaded up with mines. We couldn't even clear it. And we need those mines to slow down a potential North Korean invasion to maintain insurance. We please have an exception on the North South Korean DMZ for the landmine treaty and all the veterans were like, this is the United States flag true, we're not joining on the landmine treaty. So sometimes we start the treaty and then we don't join up. Oh, that's what they're doing was this. Get the U.S. out of the United Nations. It's violating our sovereignty. It's the global government. You see, you're really worked up about it. You like know how it's structured. They're like going. You'll see some of the high school kid yelling at the kids in the All United Nations Club. It's like chill. Okay, so Posey was a mercenary in the 1980s. Part of what was known as military assistance in Central America. It was anti-communist, so the white supremacy anti-communism aspects. This was a mission fit. They supported the Contras in Nicaragua against the Sandinista regime. There were vigilante patrols of the U.S.-Mexico war. So God plus anti-communism intertwined with white power movement. It's anti-democratic, and it was going to subvert the will of Congress. In this case, supporting the Contras was something Congress specifically said you cannot do. When Congress specifically says you cannot do something, that's a law, breaking the law. When Congress spends money and says the money is supposed to be spent like this, and the executive refuses to do it, without giving a really good reason, like, hey, this is unconstitutional, we can't do this, or we got to challenge this, or to say that when the executive branch refuses to execute the will of Congress as put forth in statute, now then you have a constitutional crisis. Unless they listen to what the court said. The court said, yay or nay, will the executive branch do what the court said? If the executive branch doesn't do what the courts say, then we have a constitution. That's all. And it's happened multiple times in American history. Jefferson or Jackson basically said, the courts have made a ruling now that first, knowing that the courts do not have the ability to enforce. Only the executive really has the ability to enforce. In theory, Congress could buy its own army and administer it itself. Congress has the power to reverse. Executive carries out Congress. The courts decide whether or not something has constitutional overrated. Marbury Madison, the right and shoulder view. It goes back to 1803. That was the master stroke where the courts basically gave themselves a massive power. It's not expressly written in the Constitution, but was kind of understood as being the right of judicial review. Linking mercenaries to the white power movement. Rhodesia, modern day Zimbabwe, 1965 to 1980, defended a white minority rule. In a bunch of places in Africa, South Africa is a good example, Zimbabwe was another example. You had a white minority, this was like civic colonialism, it was just so part of these were colonial governments. They may have broken off from their European colonial masters. You would have like a white 10% or 20% white black. They would typically set up a system of what in South Africa they call racial apartheid, where it was literally second class citizens if you were non-white. People had different rights. In South Africa, you could demand your passport in time difference. So if the white cop went up to you, they could demand all of your identification, paperwork, and you didn't have it automatically follow you right there in the street, and then take you in, and you might be going to a jail cell, or you might not come. It was terrifying. The ANC was an insurgency that got appointed against South Africa. I'd say going in the 1980s and early 1990s, the white apartheid government realized that white was all. And Instead of saying, "Yeah, we're going to fight this out to the death," they said, well, they went to a jail cell. The guy they had in their own jail, Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was the ANC leader. Why they would call him a terrorist. They sat down and talked with him. And he was an incredibly charismatic guy. And he had basically formulated kind of a plan to turn the ANC into a political party that wouldn't, when they took power, go and start slaughtering black population. And that's what happened. The ANC has been in power since after that ever since. The ANC, because there has not been other parties that have been able to take over. What happens when you have one party in charge for a really long time? What do they do? Any place you got one political party dominated to get lots of corruption. In South Africa, there's in places that are Democratic controlled South Texas for years, for decades, along the South Texas border, there were these areas that were Latino majority. This has all changed, by the way, in the last like 5 years. Trump has changed this. There were Democrats who were just in power for so long that they were buying lands, they were, manipulating contracts, all that stuff. I've heard this from other Democrats. It was not. Uh, what's that? It was like it was down interviewing with UTPA, which doesn't exist in University University of Texas Canada. Which I love that's it. And it can't be charged me. What city is it? It's not coming. It's not a people in it. Just like anything. It's not so yeah. When you have that much political juice for that long, you never just start making it. The problem is if you stay in power too long, you never really become. The ANC has become well, very. So there's a lot of problems with South African governments. We've seen massive spikes in crime. We've always had big crime problems there. But Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, Trump Society members, um, when these governments were still deciding that they wanted to fight it out, white governments were trying to maintain control. They were hiring mercenaries and attracting mercenaries from all over the world. Veterans involved were a minority, but had outsized impacts in various Latin American, Caribbean, and international conflicts. Okay, so let's define the third world. During the Cold War, the first world was the West, the United States and our Western European allies, Australia. Anybody know what the Five Eyes are? Five Eyes. Anybody know what Five Eyes? These are countries we trust. We share a lot of intelligence with them. We have articles on the amount of intelligence we share with these five countries. Guess what they are? Tell me. Five. Tell me what the Five Eyes are. United States. Yeah. Australia is one. UK. Yeah. Germany. No. Good guess though. Or no. Somewhere in Southeast Asia. No. Canada. Nowhere in Southeast Asia? Well, I mean, Australia, Canada, yes. I was thinking you were in the 51st state. No, I'm just kidding. That is so offensive, by the way. They hate that. They're like, like, it was funny when it was like just a joke. How the president of the United States is spewing this stuff, like, it's not. Like, they're changing mind behavior. They don't buy American products. They're right. They change all the American products in the supermarkets. They're on shelf on eye level with things that people mostly buy, putting Canadian products. About terrorism. So anything you did with a threat to Canada, you could have gotten by just asking these. Yeah, I don't think American. I testify in Canada. telephonic Wi-Fi WebEx, right? Or whatever it is. They're not, the prosecutors are nice to me. I'm supposed to be getting raped by the prosecutors. I don't understand. I'm like, I'm not testifying in Canada or not. This is awesome. It's basically the American legal system, except they periodically make reference to the crown. The prosecution is the crown because they represent the British crown. Okay. So Canada, UK, Australia, 20. No. Japan or South Korea. I mean, that's some history a lot. This country is having common. Let's stop. Next. No. There's one more. Everybody wants to own a home there now. Wants to go on vacation. You amazing asshole. More sheep than people. No, I guess. What was that? Bahamas? No. What? What is she? No. I mean, you guys are terrible. You know the streets, you know she's this one. What livestock? What's Australia? New Zealand. New Zealand. This countries are either British colonies, all have relatively the same concepts of rights, legal systems. So we trust those countries a lot. No the Five Eyes. That's a higher level of intelligence sharing. Uh, who was that guy that was working on the Trump campaign? And he gets drunk, bellies up at a bar, starts talking to an Australian diplomat, and he starts talking about like meetings with Russians and stuff. Well, why did we find out about that so fast? Because the Australians immediately told the U.S. government, like, okay, this is a possible counterintelligence thing. People just do and say shoot us up, and they go after the bar. Careful with the alcohol. I ever tell you the story of Jim the Bank robber? My dad was a blackjack dealer in his hall. Okay, so I put himself in Paul. The guy, the president of his returning had a scar on his face back in the 1950s. He had a scar on your face, they wouldn't let you be a bartender. So he was a bar back. Bar back's the guy who stops on the bottles and stuff. He was bar back to Jim the Bank Robber. Jim the Bank Robber was the most popular bartender in Red Hollow. People would come from all over just to hear Jim the Bank Robber tell stories. How did Jim the Bank Robber become Jim the Bank? Okay. He was a school teacher, very charismatic school teacher, high school. And he and his buddies on Fridays would get together and they would do a little drink. And at one of these drinking sessions, they kind of said offhand, if you were going to rob a bank, how would you do it? And they started talking about it. And over these Fridays, they started to develop. They developed really quickly. Like on a foolproof, nobody gets hurt, you rob a bank, there'll be a ton of money playing. And then they do. And they don't get caught. People don't get caught. And they're smart about it too. These high school teachers. Anybody who says those who can't do teach, they're full. Teachers are smart. These high school teachers, they save money. They're not spending anywhere. They're not going to get caught. There was one flaw in the plan. Jim the Bank Robber's wife was that awful. She was pissed that he wouldn't let her spend any of the money. She gets drunk one day, goes up at the bar, starts complaining to a guy in a suit. He was FBI. So Jim the Bank Robber and all his buddies go down. But the thing is, nobody got hurt, and they get all the money back every time of it. So he doesn't get a lot of jail time. Well, as in jail, they're like, well, you're not going to be a school teacher anymore, and you got to take some classes to be something else. So what are you going to do? He says, well, I guess I'll learn to be a bartender. He makes more money bartending compared to a school teacher. Becomes Jim Bank. The point of this whole story is loose lips, sinking ships, be careful with drinking. People loosen up, they start talking too much with the drinking, and it becomes a problem. Okay, first world is like Five Eyes and our European allies. That includes Japan, Germany, Singapore, any of those countries that you mentioned, but were not in the post Five Eyes, post-colonial British colonies era of groups. This is the Soviets and their allies. So that's the second, those economies. And somewhere in there, a lot of countries feel like, I don't like those guys, I don't like those guys. One of these guys is named Joseph Tito, who's the communist leader of Yugoslavia. It's not going to bow down to Stalin. He ran his own insurgency. And his idea of communism was very different. Like, one day the economic advisor came to him and said, Tito to the Times. He goes, every time you take over a mid-sized business, you be a socialist enterprise. Every time we do that, the government which is managing run this business into the ground. And he goes, so what's the rule? Like, it was like if you had more than 60 employees, you had to be taken over by the state. He goes, well, what if we just didn't take them over? We just taxed the businesses and run them up. We're like, well, yeah, probably we're better. They're better running these businesses than we are. And he goes, well, we still want to go take over the large ones so they don't get too powerful. So, you can have 60 employees, your wife can have 60 employees, your kid can have 60 employees, your other kid can have 60 employees, and pretty soon, all mid-sized industry is just basically privatized. You just figured out a workaround. That was how Chile the Yugoslavian economy was growing great. We were trying to get out of Yugoslavia in the 1970s. It wasn't until it fell apart and that Clinton when Tito died and took the whole country together. That's when Yugoslavia fell apart. In 1986, my family's Yugoslavian, Slovene. So in 1986, my family goes to visit Yugoslavia. Now I'm 6 years old, so they leave me with my Portuguese grandma, right? So they leave me behind. They go. And my dad and my brother are in the home village. It's called Planina. It's on the border with Austria. So they're walking up on the mountains, and they don't realize that they're in international. They don't even realize. And all of a sudden, these Yugoslav guards carrying like communist uniforms and Kalashnikovs walking by, walking up through the village. Don't shoot, because it's just turn loud and loud. They're on the border. Nobody was trying to get out of Yugoslavia, especially that solution, the rich part of Yugoslavia. And go back down to the village. So later on that night, they go into the local tavern, and there's all the guards. And these guys get drunk on brandy. And my dad and my brother were watching. And all the guards look at them and go, in unison, all 30 guards. Americans, don't shoot! Americans, don't shoot! They thought it was the funniest thing. They were like, it made their day, right? Trying to get out of the Slavians. So Tito in the 60s gets together with the leader of Prime Minister of India, Nehru, and they say, first world, second world, they all suck. Let's go with third world. So a lot of the developing countries, as you know them today, we talk about them as a third world non-aligned movement. At some point, China pivots out away from the Soviet Union, tries to take on the leadership of the third world. Today we don't call them third world because it doesn't make any sense. That causes war. So what do we mean? You can't call them third world, they mean developed. Right? These countries that were ostensibly would ally with the United States sometimes, or would buy AK-47s from the Soviets. Like, stuff like that, right? Okay, so that's the third world. The White Power movement sought to redeem the loss of Vietnam. Okay, so your Soldier of Fortune magazine, I told you we'd be talking about that. Soldier of Fortune magazine did not espouse white power movement ideals, but it did appeal to the readers. The type of dudes who were into the white supremacy movement really liked Soldier of Fortune magazine. That does not mean that everybody who read Soldier of Fortune magazine was racist. I knew one of the top experts in the U.S. military, teaches at National Defense University. He fought in Vietnam, and when he got time off, instead of flying home, Vietnam, you fly over to Thailand, where there was a insurgent movement among the Hmong against like Thai communists, stuff like that. And you would go and live with the Hmong and hang out with them and fight with them and teach them how to fight. Well, the fun that this was an extracurricular activity was you go from one war zone to another in free time. To fund that, so that he had the money to do it, he would write articles for Soldier of Fortune magazine. He's like, oh, I can get paid to just write articles about like 25 come on. And he's like, this. Right. He's like, sure, that thing was so bad. I'm like, where did they come? Okay. Winning skills, very important. That's part of what we learned here at college. So he was a really funny guy though. Came into his office. It's like, Tom. Then it's Tom. Tom. You're Tom. Because you kind of like wake up. Because he had to speak really loud. She only had during one year, the name went off and was like blowing out in that year. She had to be really loud. Like, bro. We only have like 50% here in free running. Really smart guy. We ended here with what's going on in uh, 1950s, late 1940s, early 1950s, how the United States was figuring out how they were going to strategize to combat communism. Part of that strategy was a public strategy that, for the most part, worked when we implemented it correctly, using the same strategy. I know you guys all think I'm probably some liberal professor. And I try to a little bit center left, but I'm going to break down on how this communism sucks. The beauty of capitalism is the price mechanism. Supply meets demand. How much there is of a thing and how much people want it and are willing to pay for it. Supply and demand means price. Price is this decentralized mechanism that is incredibly efficient. Think about it. So the government dictate the gas station price at the pump. No. The individual owner sets the price. He literally puts it on a sign to try to attract you. And generally, he's going to try, he or she will try to put the lowest price they can to try to attract you to come and buy gas. Now, they might play a different strategy, which is I'm right next to the airport, and I know you're probably desperate to get gas and right before you go to that airport. I'm going to charge you $1 more. They can do that. For the most part, the price pressure and competition means that they're going to try and keep that price as low as they can and be competitive. They will also try to target as well as they can and still be. This is a completely decentralized system. What happens when there is a shortage of supply? What happens to the price? They're going to throw it up because otherwise, if the price is too low, buy it. So it has this amazing efficiency to it. Socialist economies, truly socialist economies, not democratic socialists. Democratic socialist economies typically have prices. You ever hear anybody complaining about living in Scandinavia? They won't. They will complain about prices. They know exactly why they have high prices. It's all in taxes. They call it a value-added tax. It's fancy sales tax. So you want a beer? It's going to be an $8. Yeah. Drink less. It's good for you. Right? And they have no compunction about telling you how to live your life in the sense of we'll put in sin taxes and that. Be such a problem to until they was fascinating. God. Sorry, I'm turning into an old conservative. Stop gambling, smoking, job, I'm with you, stuff. What you deal with me? Get off my lawn. And how did we do it back? Did we do it like how long back? Well, yeah, so everybody looks super cool in the movie smoking, and that one else happened. Increase taxes on it. You make it expensive. You want to decrease? This is a sin. This is a sin tax. Telling you not to do it is bad. That's weird. Anti-smoking campaigns. Yeah, and even near the building sometimes. Like literally at Rice University was hilarious. When I was a postdoc at Rice University, about what was it, 10, almost 13 years ago. They had these little places. It was like a sandbox. And that was, it had a sign, it said, this is a designated smoking zone. And we would joke about it at high school. The people in the zoo who still smoke. They have to stand there. You stood too close to a building. The federal government had said, no, 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 no. No. All that smoke walking into the places where we're doing sensitive experiments. You don't even want your smoking walk near the building. You put tight, you legal, put relatively tight regulations on something. So why we're doing so much? We used to have that system for gambling. Now we've loosened up that system. It's going to be the best. We're being very on that. But governments can do things and keep something legal and keep it available and tightly regulate it down to the point where nobody wants to do it. You want to show me you're from a lower social class? Smoke a cigarette in front of me. That is social pressure. That is not government. That is social pressure. John Stuart Mill on liberty. What the government can do? Yeah, that's great. Some of the greatest social pressures on free speech in your life, not from the government, come from the government throwing you in jail, finding you, or taxing you based on something. It'll be people will ostracize you for behavior. It can be more powerful than anything. And that's not something covered by government freedom. It can be very powerful. Think about all the Amish who stay in Amish culture because they get kicked out and they'll be ostracized and shut. They do not. It is a powerful, powerful thing. That is why cancel culture, in many ways, in the 2010s went too far. Incredibly powerful. That's the sociological phenomenon. Even Obama was saying, you watch young people with the cancel culture in the 2010s. What we're seeing right now, I think, why is backlash. It's all went way too far. There's a backlash to it. And then the backlash is going to go too far. Watch. I can already point to things where the backlash is going too far. People can be like, each of the midterms. Watch the Democrats going to start putting up in the midterms 2 years if they get a political message that actually makes sense. Because people are going to look at it and it's like, oh, you're crazy. Oh, this guy's even crazier. They're going to see this constant cycle. Okay, let me give you an example though where socialist economists get these terror catastrophic. In the Soviet Union, you didn't have a price inflation. The government was setting the price. So Europe was saying, pants cost this much. And they would send that to the warehouse, and the factory owner would make pants. But what he figured out real quick was they weren't showing him the size of pants to make. So he made all small pants. And then when he had leftover fabric on what they sent him, he made good pants and sold them on the black market to the Russian mafia. So everybody in the Soviet Union walked around wearing flowers. And they weren't necessarily made based on how well the pants sold, whether or not people actually wanted to wear those pants. They were given incentives based on numbers. Sure, it's set by government issues. So, if you were ashamed of mirror rate, you are paid based on the tonnage of chandeliers you made. Man, why not just make one giant chandelier? You pay on the tonnage. They made a chandelier so big, no building could support its weight, it would just fall out. They hit their target. In the Great Leap Forward, China, Mao Zedong, they wanted to show, hey, we can produce more steel. We can produce more wheat than the Americans. And guess what? They did. They produced a ton of wheat. And all that wheat went into a warehouse. They can say, hey, look on how much. And the people who grew the wheat, they starved to death. 60 million. 60 million people starved while they were producing more wheat than any other country in the world. They produced so much steel, you know what they did? They had people ground out all their old steel pots, melted them down, and produced more steel. They melted down their own pots. They didn't have anything to do. Do you see the idiocy? China has wet markets. Why were wet markets so popular? Well, when you're starving to death, you get used to eating really exotic foods. You gotta eat that rat to survive. You gotta go eat that egret to survive. So you got used to eating really exotic foods. So maybe they had a penchant for it before, but it sure took off during the 1960s under Mao Zedong. And gross economic mismanagement. 6 million people died. I had a professor, I brought that number up in a class, and the professor kind of not quite mocked me, but she mocked me a little bit, and she said, the recent scholarship says that that number isn't as big. Well, how big is it? She goes, it's more like 30. Time. Gross economic mismanagement. Oh, I'm sorry. I need to off. That's how people could die of starvation. Remember, she lost food and not properly distributed. Distribution is actually true. What is price good at? Price is good distribution. Okay. So if you keep the price of something too low, it will run out of it. Your countermeasure to stop running out of the thing be to ration it. You can only have so much of this thing. Only give you this much. You will end up rationing. Okay. If the price becomes too high, people simply can't buy it. That can be a problem. What's price gouging? The price gouging is when I gouge you. I say, oh, it's not just appreciating a lot. I'm going to charge you $60 for one bottle of water. Well, I just have the limits to the immediate capitalism, right? And that's easy. Red flag European markets. Very simple. I'm Irish. Winning kills people. Winning kills people. Why are there so many angry Irish professors? Because the potato fan. Except it wasn't really about the potato fan. It's about my unwillingness of the British government. They got too high on its own supply vis-a-vis capitalism and laissez-faire economics, and wasn't willing to shut down the exports out of Ireland to prevent it. We started them. So they either died, but they don't die, but they don't got on those came to the United States. So that's where capitalism can go wrong. So notice the numbers I'm bringing up to you. 60 million dead, China, middle of the century. Soviet Union under Stalin, similar story. He shipped off all the gulags. Of course, Stalin was a nasty guy. Gulag was peasant. It was like, expressive. Well, expressive was defined at that time as something where, cost me to die. And they ship him off to like Siberia. Most of them died in trains. Couldn't read the trains. They just closed the windows in the trains. They're all suffocated. It was nasty. Or you ended up working out on a gulag out in Siberia. Which did rapidly industrialize the Soviet Union. Industrialized whole sections of the Soviet Union. Very industrialized. Notice a lot of those gulags came from a place that you now know of as Ukraine. It was an ethnic cleansing in the guise of an economic thing. Notice the genocide convention. What do they define genocide as? What do they define genocide as in the genocide convention? You throw these terms around. Genocide. What does it mean? Right, well, yes, target killing and intentionally trying to kill or wipe out a racial or an ethnicity. Yeah, so genocide convention define genocide as executing with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial or religious group as such, including killing of the state of the immigrants and so on. Okay, John, I'm not going to kill you because you're white. I'm going to kill you, your whole family, because you're Middle Yeah. It's genocide. No. The Soviet Union voted that way for exactly what I'm describing. So that they could go after the Ukrainians, they could go after the middle class, anybody who resisted the collectivization of agriculture. They set it up that way. Well, it's not, we're looking for economic reasons, not for ethnic religious reasons. See how that works? They run our biggest out there over us. What is going to be? Now, George King, from the containment strategy, he sees all these economic inefficiencies. He says, we don't really to defeat them militarily. They're going to defeat themselves. We just have to contain them so they can't keep getting more resources to, gross and inefficiently mismanage. And it's sort of funny in the Soviets here. The Soviets were pretty bad at running economies, but they were better than like Fidel Castro and the Cubans. Okay? So, like Fidel Castro comes into power, he's got Che Guevara. Che Guevara was this famous revolutionary. He was an Argentinian doctor who falls in with the socialist Fidel Castro. He helps take over Cuba. He pioneers a really interesting, work on guerrilla warfare. He does it in practice. He does a lot of guerrilla work. He writes a famous book on guerrilla warfare. Che Guevara. Che Guevara comes in, he was a good revolutionary, he was not good at running the economy. So there's this famous story that Fidel Castro was sitting around with the Revolutionary Council. We don't know if it's true or not, but it probably is. And he says something to the effect of, I need an economist. And Che Guevara shoots up his hand and he says, raises his hand. And Fidel Castro says, Che, you'll be the Minister of Financial Affairs. And he goes, oh, you said economista. I thought you said communista. No, he said, I need a communist, not an economist. So, Che Guevara was hilariously bad. Let me give you a couple of funny stories about Che Guevara. So, Che Guevara was like, try to make a business out here. He didn't really want it. Turns out it's more complicated than it is what you think. You gotta have an graph, right? You gotta have literally, you gotta have you gotta have that little bit. He's like, I thought you guys gonna buy all those materials. You're like, just like, this is cheap. What? It's a open free trade. This is why we have free trade. The only things you try to build entirely is just evil, right? Everything else, you're probably going to. So as we retrench away from free trade, watching this, stuff's going to get more expensive. The U.S. government's going to have to very carefully look at what this. I posit to you, as the economist Noah Smith writes, I posit to you, you're going to need microchips, you're going to need batteries, so it's a lot. Really good. And mass producers. What's that? Drugs. Drugs. See, that was the Nazi strategy. It's all that thing. And it's what made the blitzkrieg work. The reason why they were able to move around so fast, guys weren't sleeping. The soldiers were doing these almost what we would consider today like a death, but they were high on purpose. If you ever want to read a great book by Brown University professor Peter Andreas, Killer Hawk, History of War and Six Drugs, and he looks at drugs and warfare and how they're used. So, literally out. Right. The uh, gross inefficiencies of socialism were one of the reasons why the containment strategy worked. Basically, to a T. If we look at the fall of the Soviet Union, it was already beginning under a guy named Gorbachev. Gorbachev came to power as a reformer because they realized, oh God, this system is rotten from the inside out, and we've got to start fixing it. And so they did glasnost and perestroika. One was a political opening, and one was an economic opening. Economic equalization. Uh, the political opening, the lesson learned from the Chinese and all of Soviet Union was your economic opening. You do not want if you want to maintain. What I would say is that's where the authoritarian regimes. We are something else, and we are something better. We have inclusive institutions in the United States, and we need to be expanding our middle class. And the countries that really expand well, as we have done over the last 80 years, are the countries that maintain their middle class and have inclusive institutions, big rule of law, things like that. The idea that you can concentrate wealth in very few hands, look at how Vladimir Putin's regime functions economically. If that was good for economic growth, why aren't they growing? They don't. Their economy is like $2 trillion. It's embarrassingly low. Somebody, if we go to Russian GDP, I want to. 2.8. That's 27.3. It's probably high. I'm going to hold it. That's 2023 doesn't mean it's 2024 numbers too much. We grow in 2 years all over Russia. The U.S. government grows so fast that, not the government, the U.S. economy grows so fast. Every 2 years, we take a shape of economic growth that is the size of Russia. I'm not scared of Russia. China makes me nervous. Somebody look up China's GDP, 17.7. There you go. Yeah, everybody's afraid they're going to overtake us. And if you factor out what we're at the basis, they're fractional. So they're not going to be on the market. We're running into a couple of structural features in our economy that you can be concerned. Our debt is higher. So now that the interest rates are going up, servicing that debt is more difficult. That's going to start putting strains on the budget. And you are used to your life for the last 10 years has been budget surpluses or budget deficits, where we're spending more and injecting more into the economy than we're taking in taxes and racking the rent. That's going to be much more expensive to service very soon. And that's going to start crowding out other things. And so we're going to have to start getting more efficient. There's a lot of sectors where we will be squeezing efficiencies out of it. 18% of GDP is spent on health. That's successful. Normal industrialized countries spend around 10. The highest I've seen is like 18% of GDP. Or a lot of health. We're spending way too much on healthcare and not getting very much out of it. We are not living longer than people in Europe or South Korea or anywhere else. Your overall life expectancy is not on a slight factor and double there. These are all structural features, but we can fix those. So the idea of containment was we were not going to threaten the Soviets. We were going to effectively contain them and let them collapse from the inside out. Now we can help the process along through covert action. Covert action means things that we can do, say, are not happening. This is the use of CIA and spies. The CIA is really good at overlap. In the 1950s, the Iranian government, democratically elected, decided they were going to expropriate oil. Can anybody tell me what expropriation is? Expropriation. This is something you should just know about geopolitics. It's the government seizure of property or change in using private property rights. Exactly. So, at different points in the 20th century, lots of countries decided that they were going to expropriate oil, oftentimes from foreign companies. Mexico did it in the 1930s. They nationalized their oil company. Now, you would call it payments. If you ever visited Mexico, well, 10, 20 years ago, you would see all of gas stations being called today. They're starting to legalize some of those. You'll still see tons of gas stations all over. There's one national oil. Iran tried to do this in the 1950s, take British and American oil companies who had made investments in those countries, and the US CIA, in collaboration with British intelligence, effectively overthrew the Iranian government and installed the Shah of Iran. And under the Shah of Iran, the economy was going really well. The Shah of Iran had this really nasty service. I mean, really nasty. They were known for just picking people up off the streets, they was dissidents, horrific torture, taking people's skin, making lampshades out of them. Really nasty stuff. And that led to the 1970s, 1979, Iranian Revolution, which was not in our interest. We call that blowback. In the 1950s, we overthrew a government that was democratically elected under Arbenz. A guy named Arbenz in Guatemala gets elected. He says, well, all those banana plantations, they are going to be for Guatemalan people. Foreign companies have gotten enough profit out of it. United Fruit Company calls it YG Eisenhower and says, hey man, that's not cool. They're going to take all our stuff. And the federal government said, yeah, we're not agree with that, and CIA went down there. So we had a bad reputation in some places during the 1950s while we played this strategy of containment and engaged in covert action. Anywhere where we saw the potential of communist revolution, we were trying to stop it. So that was part of the covert action. We also started getting good at and thinking more about counterinsurgency theory, coin theory. Counterinsurgency is thinking management warfare. In counterinsurgency, you are not fighting a conventional battle. You are dealing with an insurgency. An insurgency is defined as a political military struggle, defined by the standards. Political military struggle to overthrow or change the direction of existing government, unconventional means. I mean by unconventional means. Things like terrorism can be unconventional means. But an insurgency or guerrilla warfare broader than just the use of terrorism. They do reject some of the rules of warfare. Guerrillas and insurgents tend to not carry their arms openly and break uniforms. They can melt back into the population. They swim amongst the people as fish in the sea. Mao Zedong. That paraphrase. His book, People's War, or On Guerrilla Warfare, is widely read in those military circles. If you want to understand guerrilla warfare, you've got our insurgency and counterinsurgency, you have to understand Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong was really good. And we know because we gave a ton of money and weaponry to the KMT in China while they were fighting the Japanese, and they sucked. They just weren't any good. They had better tanks, they had better equipment. They did not mount a very good resistance against the Japanese, despite a lot of material support. The person who did a great job is the Japanese. And he had nothing but a small ragtag peasant army. He picked up more people along the way. And he told his guerrilla fighters in his pamphlets and stuff like that, strange things that you wouldn't think have anything to do with warfare. He says, When you stay in the peasant's house and they give you a place to sleep, roll up that, roll up at that. I can tell these spiders. Why do you put so much emphasis on them? When you're staying in someone's house, roll up and spiders. The idea was we were not fighting for a piece of territory. We were fighting to support and love the people are what you're fighting for. You're not fighting for a given piece of land or just a certain military objective. You're trying to win the hearts and minds of the population. That is why we look at that. Like, Mao figured some things out as he went, and he did a very successful guerrilla campaign against the Japanese. He did Japanese painting here in blood. So counterinsurgency theory is a recognition you're not fighting a conventional battle. Counterinsurgency theory is a recognition you're not fighting a conventional enemy. And you're going to have to think in big picture about a lot of things. General David Petraeus. U.S. invades Iraq in 2008. There's insurgencies piling up all over the place. From 2003 to about 2006, there's a refusal to acknowledge the word insurgency. They literally say, don't use the word. Don't use the word. Don't say insurgency. Finally, one of the generals, I forget his name, it starts with a Z. He finally says it on a media interview. He says it on live TV. He says, we're in an insurgency. There were some places in Iraq that had gone into insurgency, where they had real success. And there were places where we should not have had success. Mosul, Iraq, we should not have had success. There were 300 to 500 retired Iraqi Baptist generals living in Mosul, Iraq. If ever there was a place that should have had an insurgency where Americans were getting killed left and right, it should have been Mosul, Iraq. And yet it didn't happen. A guy named General David Petraeus was in charge there. And they called him King David or the mayor of Mosul. Because he did something crazy from the military lines. He got there and he started asking questions. And he had his soldiers taking out the trash, establishing sanitation routes, getting the lights turned back on, establishing electricity, making sure people had clean drinking water, and setting up the entire water drinking systems, some of which have been destroyed. Why did he do that? And why did he face no insurgency when others didn't? Yeah, no. We got to respect the population. We also address underlying grievances. You want to see me pissed off? You probably be a food tolerance. I will be kind of really become pissed off. The grades will all go down. Like, no, I'm kidding. The TS is great. The point I'm trying to make is we are all systemic. So you have to address at least those grievances first. Now, people can invent grievances. Grievances can be real or perceived. And we'll see this in white supremacist terrorists. A lot of grievances are just made up. Have you ever watched that show, Super Sweet 16? I don't know, maybe I'm just going to go on dates. I just watch that show. You see it? Almost every episode goes like this. It's a very rich girl, very rich parents. And they're putting on a Sweet 16 party. And then your 16th birthday, you get a gift, right? If you're super rich. I get it. That was not my list. Whatever. A very rich girl gets a gift. And she gets a really nice BMW. This was almost every episode. A really nice Beamer, like 78 series Beamer. And she starts her out. Because it's not a monster. It's hard to take that serious. It's hard to just not say, this is embarrassing. Are you kidding me? Grievances can be real or perceived. You're going to be part of a racial group that is doing better than every other racial group in America. And you can still feel like you're falling down. Why? You might not be comparing yourself to every other racial group. You might be comparing yourself to your father. If you are comparing yourself to a prior generation, and a prior generation had a higher standard of living, or was able to achieve certain life milestones earlier than your generation, you will feel a sense of relative deprivation. Relative deprivation. Relative deprivation and the concept of relative deprivation is what most historians identify. That's when revolutions happen. That's when people get violent. That's when people rebel. They feel like they're being ripped off in some way. There were all these peasant rebellions throughout Chinese history. Did they rebel when they were starving them? Almost never. They're too busy scrounging around for food. They oftentimes rebelled when things started to get better because they were mad and living in this situation. Or they would rebel when leadership promised a better standard of living, and that standard of living did not. And even if things are objectively doing better, relative deprivation. Grievances can be real or they can be perceived. So Robert Thompson. So counterinsurgency theory is about all encompassing theory. And the reason why I'm telling you about counterinsurgency theory is during the Cold War, we were sponsoring insurgencies and we were engaging in counterinsurgency to combat the spread of communism and to continue where it was. Okay, War Powers Act of 1973. Many people think that this is an act that gives the president power. It was actually a limitation on presidential. Who determines foreign policy for the United States within the U.S. government? Who in the U.S. government determines foreign policy for the most part? What? Which branch of government? Executive, the president. That goes all the way back to Trump. For the most part, the president can act unilaterally. There are some places where some limitation on. What's that? They can be official acts. Non-official acts, maybe. So like we're can after collaborative? Can after less immunity. Okay. This came from Commonwealth, so that's in my memory. Okay. Alright. Let's say something happens in the world. President Trump wants to fire tomahawks under pressure. Can you do this? Let's see. And he has through this administration. You know what? I think he was right to do it. Bashar al-Assad dropped chemical weapons on his own people. Obama had previously stated, swear your little professor's finger, criticized it, you know. Obama had previously stated, if they do that, that's a red line, we will bomb them if they do that. They did, but it's Congress. And of course, Congress, the Republicans want to put it in an awkward position, and then the Republicans were like, I'm not going to get involved. He went to Congress, and Congress chose not to act upon it. So he did nothing. He let him, he declared fine, and he did nothing on it. Didn't have to come to Congress. Could have did it himself. Could have filed his tomahawks. Just like he correctly launched the raid against Osama bin Laden into another country's sovereignty. He asked his permission. He made the call. He said all of the countries. Joe Biden actually told him not to do it. Surinski. Lifelong trace. Obama did it anyway. That's the place where Obama got it right. He got it wrong on Syria. He did not fire it. So when Syria did it, this is Trump was in office. Trump said, oh, we're going to launch Hamas, we're going to hit stuff up in Israel. Did the right thing. Didn't have to ask him to reach permission to do it. It was the full policy of me who was so embarrassed to the back of the show was this. They would drop a bomb on him, and then like an hour later, Trump's posting an American flag picture on Twitter. He's letting us know. Was that the one the Soleimani? I think so. I really did. He started Soleimani. Follow post American flag. The trick came out doing Soleimani. Started Soleimani while he was in here. which is essentially on out. So you blew him up while he was in the back, which is essentially on out. So there was some tricky stuff about targeting Soleimani in hindsight. With weakening of Soleimani, and then you combine that with Israel's actions against Hezbollah and Hamas, Iran was much weaker than the Israelis. And that's typically, I mean, I would consider that Iran's an authoritarian, nasty regime. Not that there are much other authoritarian, nasty regimes, at least. Okay, where were we? Oh, so, Canada in the president's action. Congress, very good. But then, those phone conferences, I'm still, it's recording me. And you need money. Congress has the power of the purse. You need money. Now, theoretically, the judicial branch could also limit the president, but not so much on foreign policy. For example, the president's doing a lot of things where he's going around fire. You got those going around fire. Including things that have already been funded by Congress. Which things do you think are going to hold up? Which things? Because what's going to happen is, of course, yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. So they go, yeah. It's kind of, okay, like I have to laugh, right? It's kind of funny. People who have no experience in government come in and think they can just start firing people. Okay. You fire the guys who are in charge of the news. Were those the people to fire, like limited analysis, governmental analysis of what people actually do is probably a good idea. They're firing a bunch of people in the IRS. Now I know nobody likes to pay their taxes. Oh, I'm forgetting about the IRS. I'm gonna get audited or whatever. Okay. The truth is, the one place the U.S. government can spend more money and make more money is the IRS. If you want to deal with a budgetary crisis, if you want to deal with tax evasion from the richest Americans, you're going to need a bunch of employees to actually sit down and make their books, which are really complicated. What happens is when they reduce the number of IRS agents, they're more likely to audit you. What do I mean? They're more likely to audit the poorest Americans. How do they do it? They send out a blanket letter. It's not a real audit. This is how it goes. It's a blanket letter. Prove your kid is your kid. What evidence would you have said? For university. Oh, not good enough. You can save somebody else. Somebody else could have been providing that support. It was the child tax credit that we're holding up your return. Yeah. What's that? What is it? It's like $2,000. It used to be like what got it to like 34 when you just roll out. I remember I had kids. I had deductions from children. I had tax credits. I had children. So that was nice when it was just like 34. But we probably did a little too much. I say that. May have contributed some to inflation. Yeah, 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 yeah. It's nice. I mean, most economists, when they're looking at it, that's the kind of stimulus they need. You should make it costly for people to have children. Try to get those costs. Uh, because otherwise they'll say, oh, kids are expensive. Kids are already expensive. We're paying way more fees any child. Especially if something way more than 2 years to get. It's just about great. So, okay. Um, talk about country services. We talked about the War Powers Act of 1973. This limited the presidential power to 90 days. So, order to go within 90 days, 3 months, you have 3 months to run your unilateral foreign policy. You're going to have to come back to Congress to fund this thing. We're going to determine how much money you're actually getting. So this was a limitation on presidential power. Notice who's president in 1973? No, Margaret Snyder, 76. Somebody look it up. 1973. Who's president? Yeah. Yeah, it's smart. It's right. It was nine, was it 74? Yeah, 74 Hebrew size. So you're really seeing people are not judging Richard Nixon. They're like, this guy's full. Sorry, so we're reining in the executive branch and put limitations on executive branch power. Okay, Iran-Contra, 1986. So, remember I told you, 1979, shit. Overthrow, the Shah, we got a very unfriendly government in Iran. We're sponsoring the Contras in Nicaragua, trying to get them weapons. So there's this kind of complicated story. There's a lot of conspiracy theory around it, but a lot of it is probably true. American CIA is probably running code for the Contras, probably through some Mexican cartels in the United States. Okay. Hold on. There's a lot of moving pieces to this. Some people who thought they were a lot smarter than they were in the US government thought, oh, there are these rebels in Iran and we will sell them weapons to try to overthrow the Iranian government. Intelligence operation. So we sold weapons to Iran, possibly coke into the United States, supported the Contras with weapons sales. You see how this was all going to be really ugly when it blows up and comes public? It does go public. A bunch of people take the ball around Reagan. Reagan claims plausible deniability. I'm a friendly old man. It was kind of like, how Joe Biden might be able to have the defense of Biden. Sure. Lying. Well, that was wrong. Before there was Joe Biden, a really old president, Joe Biden, there was a really old Ronald Reagan, who everybody loved, extremely affable, and that people in his National Security Council lied all over the world, engaging in these really bad deals and getting caught. Oliver North ended up having a show on Fox News after having been a G. Gordon Liddy, another one of those guys, ended up having a show on Fox News in the mid 2000s, or being a regular guest on Fox News in the mid 2000s. My running joke was if I ever go to jail and they ask me what will I do when I get out, I say, well, if I'm a felon, I guess I could be a Fox News host. It was really bad there for a while. Yes. There's a show on YouTube, Snowfall, and it evolves into that. Yeah, it's really good. It's about oh, Snow is a cocaine. So like the CIA involves into that of the smuggling weapons out of the rebels and bring back. It's a really good show. It helps with that. There's a movie, it's called Barry Steele. Barry Steele was one of his finalists. He was basically working for the CIA, but he was not CIA himself, but he was basically hired. And he started really very successful. And they were essentially helping him with the made on. Okay. Well, it's like a real movement against the Vietnam War. And the public after Vietnam had no interest in foreign intervention. All of this whole picture feeds into you have a bunch of these white supremacist guys called mercenaries who go down to places like Central America, do military training, these right-wing governments. They believe that they're doing this all within U.S. foreign policy uh, and anti-communism, etc. Sure. So let's talk about Nicaragua. Nicaragua, the Somoza regime had ruled Nicaragua from the 1930s. There was a general who attempted to rebel and overthrow and take control of Nicaragua. He was kind of like a little bit of a socialist, he was leaning that way. His name was General Sandino. The American Marines went down there, kicked the crap out of him. Put him down. But people always remember that name, Sandino. So, the Somoza regime is running this country. There are kleptocracy. What is a kleptocracy? What's that? Yeah. Klepto, exactly. Kleptomania. Like, there's just some people that just can't stop stealing. They're doing it through the throne, whatever it is. Kleptocracy is a government that just steals from its own population. Does that lead to good economic growth? No. Vladimir Putin, he's a kleptocrat. Somoza, he's a kleptocrat. So, Somoza regime has ruled since the 1930s. They had U.S. support for anti-communists. The Sandinistas toppled him. Well, toppled Somoza in the name of General Sandino from the 1930s. And they're doing this in the 1970s. And the Sandinistas had a broad tent, which included Catholics and capitalists, because Somoza was just so terribly corrupt. If you're a socialist party and you can get capitalists and Catholics on your side, whatever existing regime is there must be really, really bad. So here's how it happens. Monopolies of capital, and there's this big earthquake, I think in either 80 or late 1970s. And the whole world is like, holy crap, that was a terrible earthquake, people are dying, and they sent all this money and all this food aid, all of this. And none of it is. So it's just basis. And it makes the entire population lose faith in this social regime. And the Sandinistas, this kind of like teenage and in their 20s, young revolutionaries, they actually succeed in taking control of the government and overthrowing the Somoza regime. Now, during this period, the Somozas are trying to hire mercenaries to train their units. In China, a U.S. mercenary becomes a National Guard figure in the Somoza regime. The Somoza regime, their military is called the National Guard, which is basically one domestic and external military force. One of the things about Latin American regimes in the Western Hemisphere is you really have to ask yourself, what is the military? Think about it. What is the Mexican army do? What's their raison d'etre? Their reason for existence? Let's say China tries to invade Mexico. What are we going to do? What? Oh, well. Like better jump, we're going to have us the Chinese do if they try to invade. What if Russians do? We'll have those Russians. We're not going to let anybody invade Mexico. No, what if we just invade Mexico? What's the army be able to do about it? Not loads nothing. What if walls invade Mexico? When last long, that's not what trying to invade Mexico. Okay, so Mexican army, what exactly is it that you do here, Bob? You just respond to national disasters. You respond to internal rebellions. You respond to drug wars. You might be providing really dental care for a really poor kid in Chiapas every season in his life. You might be the Navy, and you might be essentially running the ports, which is what they do now. You're not necessarily trying to combat an external threat. Now, if you're the right question, do you do a land invasion? No, you put the largest KGB station in Mexico. Is it because you think Mexico is important? That is the soft underbelly in the United States. If you're the Chinese, you're going to move into businesses. You're going to do this soft, brave warfare, and in between stuff to try to get it. What is the U.S. doctrine that dictates our foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere? What do we call it? This is one of the oldest U.S. foreign policy doctrines. I'll learn about it in high school. Very good. Wrote up. Go back to 1803. This is our sphere of influence, the Western Hemisphere. Nobody else gets to be here. No other greater powers of play. You know when we said that? The Europeans? Just laugh. Because they were playing all over the Western Hemisphere. I mean, at one point, Mexico was controlled by the French in the 1800s. Castle of Chapultepec. That was Maximiliano. That was a Belgian, leader of Mexico from Belgium. We couldn't enforce them right now in 1803 when we said, we still had Spain controlling places like Florida. But by the mid 1800s, or the early 1900s, well, yes, we could enforce. And what that meant was we were providing hegemonic stability within Latin America, for better or for worse. Interstate war within Latin America is lower than in almost any other region in the world. Countries basically don't go to war with each other in Latin America. Does that mean it's not violent all the time? Now, there's civil wars, there are guerrilla warfare, there are drug wars, things that can kill people at a slow burn really fast. When Peru and Ecuador went to war with each other in the 1980s, it was over in like a few weeks. I know the ambassador, the American ambassador organization in the United States, who negotiated that ceasefire. Luigi Aguinaldo, right there. Basically, through pure diplomacy, American might, and influence, we were able to stop the war from continuing on and serving stuff. Basically, there are no wars in terms of interstate conflict within Latin America. As in part, the hegemonic stability provided by the United States. On the other hand, there are all these small wars, drug wars, insurgencies, civil wars, rebellions, all of these things, they do occur all the time. So what was the United States doing during the Cold War that some of these white supremacists sometimes got involved in? The Panama Canal Zone. We controlled the Panama Canal. Where did Panama used to be a part of? Anybody know what country we used to be a part of? No. Well, maybe once upon a time you go back. What country were they immediately before being Canada? They were just throwing the province of Colombia. What Teddy Roosevelt wanted was he knew that there was a good canal zone. In fact, there's actually a better canal zone in Newport. But you connected a bunch of religions. But he basically goes and he sponsors a coup d'etat in Canada. He gets some businessmen in Canada together. And he basically says, hey, if you guys declare independence and break away from Colombia, we'll back the terror. And then we built the canal zone. And that's what they do. They actually did it. And when they asked him, Teddy Roosevelt, they kept pressing him in the presser. Listen, did you take Panama? Did you take Panama? And finally he says, yes, I took the canals. I took that. And afterwards he goes, that press conference was done 12. One of his advisors. And the advisor says to him, Thomas, you completely accused of seduction, like seduce the kind of agency. I know that press conference where it goes for it. We took it. In Panama is an independent country, so we can have a country that we can control, that we can get a canal zone. Now, a bunch of countries that try to build a canal in this area. It's good, it's strategic. One hour, I can do every day, and you have an agreement with the intensity. So this that go all the way around is a really big deal. Because this is strategically important. Plus, because like the French are trying they kill them. Carry elevator. Basically, all your crews in Panama just start dying. The Scottish trying to set up a colony. All you think goes, Scottish people us. No. So this is still. So the real masterstroke, what the United States did in the Canal Zone was we went to war with the mosquitoes. And it was house to house warfare, and it was any water supply got sprayed with chemicals that were going to kill these mosquitoes, and you did it. You know where else? From the same time, the southern United States of America. How many of you have ever happened there? You never even heard. You're like, oh, it just happens in more other places there. It used to be endemic here in the United States. We went house to house and we wiped out Aedes aegypti mosquitoes. Wiped them out. It's kind of an amazing thing. Now we still have mosquitoes around. Don't put it flush. Now we rely on utility districts or special districts. What is that? Location stone, clarity, yeah, massage, that's awesome. Yeah, we're neglecting tropical diseases are moving further north. Why? It's getting hotter further north. So we are experiencing some climate change. As that climate change happens, you're seeing these areas where the mosquitoes have been, certain types of mosquitoes, certain types of diseases that have been further south, we're moving further north. That means we'll see more neglected. NTDs, neglected tropical diseases. So the Panama Canal Zone is a military canal zone, military U.S. project, and the United States succeeds where other countries completely fail. Do it by killing yellow fever, by killing the mosquito. That's where we succeed. We can actually build this canal zone. It's an incredibly important military area. We control it for a long time. We eventually give it back to the Panamanians in the early 2000s, I believe. Did anybody tell me a famous American who was born inside the Panama Canal Zone and ran for president? That's against that history. Ran for president. This is the most interesting case. You know, everybody's thinking of Obama, the birther case. The judge in the case. So it is. The last one, not this one. You guys have heard this? The federal judge actually heard the birther case. Now, no federal judge wanted this case because they knew there was BS, right? Obama was born in Hawaii. Then it's got a birth certificate. Shut up, end of story. Right? 14th Amendment, born here in the United States, you're a U.S. citizen. This is written into the Constitution. Donald Trump's going to try and change it. It's not going to happen. Unless we just got off and you guys were trying to. Okay. You look nervous. Oh, I talked about straight up the Constitution. That it wasn't going to happen. And you looked at me like, you started twisting your head. You were stepping. So basically, once you have the birth certificate, the case is over. It's very simple. Nobody wants to hear this case because they know all the crazy are going to come. So what happens to the federal judge David Carter the first day he gets his case? His administrative clerk gets a phone call, and it is a 2-hour long, violent threat and rant on voicemail. And he looks at her and he says, whatever you're doing, do not believe that message. She goes, oh, we can use it for evidence? He goes, no, voicemail box. Oh, we don't have to take any more phone calls. He knew, everybody knew how they were going to roll. A judge does not have the ability to unseat a sitting president. That is too much power for the judiciary. If you wanted to decide that he was not born in the United States, you should have made that decision earlier in the primary process. That being said, the man has a birth certificate. This is stupid. It's done. The more interesting case is the guy he was running against, John McCain. John McCain is an American war hero. His dad was an admiral stationed at the Panama Canal Zone at the time of his birth. U.S. Constitution doesn't say anything about where people were born for any position except one. President of the United States was born in the United States. A natural born U.S. citizen. He's John McCain, a natural born U.S. citizen. I reckon yes. Most born in Japan in our military, like they should the natural born U.S. citizen. I like that interpretation, and I would agree with that interpretation. That was not the founding fathers. Ted Cruz was born in Canada to a U.S. citizen. Is he a natural born citizen? He had citizenship through his mother. Was he born in the United States? That's by statute. One of your parents is a U.S. citizen? Yes. Correct. Fill out some minor paperwork, basically you're a U.S. citizen. You're born a U.S. citizen. But the U.S. Constitution is specific. The founding fathers understood what they wrote to me born here in the United States, not to an American while they were in England. Very specific. So the more interesting question was, could John McCain have been president? I say if he's born on a U.S. military base, while his father was serving in the U.S. military. I don't think the founding fathers realized that we were having military bases all. I don't think they saw that. They didn't see how big we were. But it's an interesting case. The other case is still interesting than the case of Obama. Obama's case is interesting. Of course, to show that stuff. You know, Hawaii. Fort Benning, Georgia. Fort Benning, Georgia, children trained in a lot of foreign military, particularly in Latin America. It's what's called the School of the Americas. Now, the School of the Americas gets a lot of bad rap. I know military people who served at the School of the Americas, seen the courses that were provided there, and are like, that is not how it's. What they were learning there was about strategy, counterinsurgency strategy, things like that. I have heard people give wax philosophical these deep speeches about how it's throat slitting, wonderful. That's pretty much how to do. That's not the experience I had when I was contributing at National Defense University. I talked to people who were actually there. They're like, that's not really what's going on. The strategy classes and not our counterinsurgency strategy. That's cool. I wasn't doing bad babies. That was not necessarily what our training of veterans took that. But that was not necessarily the things that they were learning here. We do a lot of training of foreign militaries. Just a quick funny story on what I did here. I'll take you less than 2 minutes. I was at National Defense University as an intern. And there's this really funny story. Time before I was there. Bill Clinton liked to go for runs. And National Defense University is at over there is Washington, D.C. is like a diamond. And at the bottom of the diamond, there are two rivers, Anacostia and Potomac. They meet there. So it's this beautiful place where this military base is. It's a great place for Bill Clinton if you want to go for the morning run while Washington, D.C. You can do it safely there. You drive on over, you go to your money and run. So you join the morning run on pace, guys, start taking following. And there's some real affable American gentlemen. And Bill Clinton is doing this for them. And an affable American gentleman goes, hey, we got about 15 Latin American lieutenant colonels who just love things. You know, we need to go press columns. And Bill Clinton never said, right, you have to be a good bench. Bill Clinton was that kind of guy. He just loved that stuff. So he wants to come over. Starts shaking hands with these Latin American lieutenant colonels, and he's got them laughing and all this stuff. Secret Service lost him. And they called up in the morning England conference. As one of the American generals had stolen the president of the United States. They didn't pay attention here. Right, that's what the fun stories from Florida games. Okay, we will continue this on for militaries. Okay, so the White Power movement at different times attempted to overthrow. Did that student really just come in here to get to consume she was the one who was like the president, you know, was on campus. Okay, no. She just came in, she just yelled at me. That's crazy. Wow. I mean, it's really interesting it gets to my ego. She was my brilliant lectures. Oh. All right. So the White Power movement, this time groups attempted to overthrow entire small Caribbean governments and take them over. so that they could use control those governments and those islands to fund their own offers in the United States and for criminal activity. One thing I'd really like to point out to you is the crime of terror continuing. Any terrorist group has to do a significant amount of fundraising, and at some point, that's going to involve criminal. It's actually a person. And that criminality will become a part of the character of making take over the world. And it becomes part of the character of that group. So just bear that in mind. When we look, for example, at the Irish Republican, they were so anti-drug at one point that they did these crucifixions that they actually put the person on the ground, shooting them back in the kneecaps, the person that would walk again, if they're dealing drugs in their hands. At some point, they went from that to being the drug dealers. It becomes a part of the character. The fundraising becomes a part of the character. So these white power movements, the intention to overthrow the government and to funnel money to the Klan. Dominica is a small island, not to be confused with the FBI actually figured it out. There was a running joke, and I don't know if I ever told you the joke. If you remember the Klan in the United States, all your friends are at some point, the US government did such a good job in the 1980s and 90s at infiltrating these organizations. They had all these FBI agents who were either running informants or were going undercover themselves as drug stars. That it became like a running joke. It's like, oh, are you a legitimate member of the Klan? Well, all your friends are FBI agents. You're the only one. You know, it's like when you sit down at the poker table and don't know who the sucker is, and you are the sucker. Now that started to change after 9/11. As we saw, noted terrorism scholar, one minute call points out. We got attacked by Islamic terrorists. We started to focus on Islamic terrorists. So we took our eye off the ball of white supremacy terrorists against domestically inside the United States. And then we started focusing on Islamic radical extremists. Then by about the mid 2010s, or early 2010s, you started to see the FBI come out. Hey, we gotta pay attention to this. By 2015, they were worried about white supremacist infiltration of American law enforcement. At cops. And I talked to cops and they go, I warn my guys. They're trading these WhatsApp messages while they're working. And some of them are white supremacists and anti-Semitic memes and stuff like that. And he's like, I don't want my guys to do that. You don't want to do that. Many of you are going to go into law enforcement careers, and I would just tell you to be clear here about anything that's a racist joke or anything like that, even in your personal life. Because what's going to happen if they get you on the stand? What's a criminal defense attorney going to do? Or they're going to say you're biased. You're biased against my client. You're biased against my client because they're a minority, or this, or that. They're going to do anything to try to create these without. I used to work for a federal judge. I was his TA. Judge David Carter, who's legal implications to drug trade. He was a federal judge. He was the one I think I told you he decided whether or not to law. You heard the word case. You already knew he wasn't going to make that. He was essentially a ruling. He didn't have power to make this. And one time the university was late. Hey, Eugene, you're here. I thought you took off. I told my TA. So I was like, oh, she stayed for attendance and then she bailed?
I could never do that to you.
Oh, my God. So my TA used to talk like, so I'll let him know. Sure. That's your particular. What was I going to say? We were talking about white supremacist infiltration of law enforcement. The judge wanted to avoid even the perception of improprieties. You are supposed to wait paying him for his adjunct class, $2,000. He could have easily put his vacation down on a credit card when he reached it down on a credit card. Why? He didn't want it affecting his credit score or showing up as a debt. That is how avoidant and averse he was to anything that could even affect his security clearance or would even look like some susceptibility. He wasn't going to put a $2,000 vacation down on a credit card and wait to get reimbursed or wait to get his pay and reimbursed to pay. He wouldn't even do that. He was very, very careful. Sometimes even avoiding the perception of impropriety. And I would caution people to be very careful. I know won't Trump pardon all the January 6th protesters, but I would caution people to mind affiliations. I've had students in the past who had, this was years ago, 3%er patches over that. Okay, all right. Yeah, you're including, well, they participated in January 6th. I see the look on your face, right? It's a question I get asked when I do background check for any background checks for my students. I always like, come on, parent. But there's a question, and the last question is always, is something in the background. Do you know this person who have ever been a part of or expressed support for a group that attempted to overthrow the U.S. government? So any group that participated in something like an insurrection, you may disagree on whether or not that's an insurrection. But again, avoid the appearance of impropriety. I would recommend you mind your affiliations so that you get a job. It's my recommendation to you to mind your affiliations. That's not a left right distinction, but just any group that possibly perceived as attempting to overthrow or monkey wrench any sector of the U.S. government. Listen, you guys all get good jobs, and my primary interest is one day I'm going to get pulled over. I want to look at one of my students who's making more money than me. It's going to let me off with a work. That's what I'm hoping. That's my whole motivation. After we come out since I lost my touch. Okay. So what happened in El Salvador? In El Salvador, there were mercenaries training right in government, and some of those mercenaries were white supremacists. But eventually, when Reagan came in, remember I told you Ronald Reagan was all anti-communist all the time. And Reagan sent American Special Forces down there. Now, Ronald Reagan and the Special Forces they got down there, they're really thoughtful guys. We have this image of these special forces guys in the movies, that they're gun toting guys who are thoughtful. No, do food counterinsurgency work. It's thinking the environments. It's kind of what do you feel about this? The first thought that they have when they sat down with each other after says the right side of the story. Let me tell you a quick story. I tell you the story about my brother who's a soccer coach again, this is the South. In Salvador. Comes from El Salvador. Having breakfast with my brother and his assistant soccer. Guy's an older guy. Short, really good soccer. He finds out that I'm at international and it's university. He's like, oh, that's interesting. What are you studying there? I said, counterinsurgency. Because all you study counterinsurgency? I was a guerrilla in the 1980s. They shot my brother 19 times in just a lot of things. And it said to him, back off. So here's how it was organized. The people had essentially tried to have pro-democratic protests. El Salvador was essentially governed by 14 very white only the Americans. Because they done a peaceful protest, you ever been to state victory. And then they had this right-wing test around. And you were safe of them. Pulled out of their bed, they murdered work for their families, leave their bodies there in the movement. They're right-wing death zones. One of them was led by a guy named Roberto de Amazon. His nickname, and I mentioned this to you before, Coach Wars Bob. Wonder how he got that nickname. I'll let your imagination do it. He was part of the right wing. I hate him. Yeah. And the Americans that get down there, the Americans, force you like, there's spots take there. This is not society. Now, why would you want to stop them from killing people who had protested the government? Think about what that coach said to me. I was a guerrilla in the 1980s. They shot my brother 19 times. And they're pretty terrorists. Exactly. He saw his brother get shot 19 times in the back. What's he got to lose? They're coming for him next. Better go to the hills and join the guerrillas. It's a recruitment boon when you go around killing innocent people, jailing innocent people. You want to get things right. You want to use violence like a scalpel and counter-search. Don't get me wrong. This is no damn stuff. People are going to die. People are going to be killed. But you don't want to kill innocent people. You want to get it right. You got to do well by using violence very strategically, like a scalpel. So sometimes less is more. And that's the title of an article by a Delta special operator who's a super duper academic, High Ross. He says, sometimes the United States, when we're supporting another country militarily, we don't do well when we put an entire army there to fight. We do really well when we give them as little as possible. And El Salvador is one of these magical examples. So, remember the Democrats in Congress, they did not want to support anything that was about getting involved in another counterinsurgency after Vietnam. Remember I told you that about Central America and all that? When the Democrats were acting like a fireman on these foreign interventions in the 1980s. And one of the military guys says in a congressional hearing in front of one of the congressmen, he says something to the effect of, well, we could do this all in El Salvador with a very small number of Americans. Only a handful of advisors. Few dozen. And the Democrat goes, oh, man. I said it's on top of the head here, and I can't remember exactly. 55 or 53. And the Democrat said, total manpower intervention in El Salvador, the U.S. government, 53 soldiers. Period. Done. And call your bluff. The Democrat thought he was calling the guy's bluff. Now, my advisor, I told you he was State Department during the 1980s, running around with Congress and stuff like that, but he was running around other places. And he remembers getting on the air, the helicopter, being under a school, America's having airways, and going in outside. And the pilot would say, 51, 52, 53, 54, you have to go today, get off. The military was fighting by Congress's law. Very specifically saying, only 53, only 55, whatever that number is. It was a magic number. And they would say, you don't get to go to 30. Only 53 Americans in the country news. What that meant was that they could only do advising. Now, the El Salvadoran government was recruiting child soldiers. Very early. Yeah, LN was also recruiting very early. They would argue that was because they were trying to run away from death squads. Oh, I don't know. But what happened in El Salvador was very interesting. Basically, if you actually keep a mother, let's say your boy's 12, 13 years old. You have a choice. He's either going to get killed by a death squad, as a civilian. By 16 or 17, he's probably going to go into the El Salvadoran military. Strictly in. He's going to run off into the, he's going to have to run off into the hills and be with death in Atlanta and live his life. Relevant. Or there's another option. Go north. Here's as much money as I can give you. Ride the train with me, so about this time. As far north as you can, it's California, minus the dinner. They ended up in California. Let's say they ended up in a place called Los Angeles. Let's say then the El Salvadorians got there. Mexican gangs were already established and started shit out of it. So let's say they formed their own gangs. One of them being called Mara Salvatrucha Stoners. Little stoner gang, right? And let's say Mara Salvatrucha turned into Mara Salvatrucha, which means smart trout. And then let's say they made an alliance with the Mexican mafia in the prison system. And let's say they were called MS-13. And let's say a rifle gang got going on 18th Street, Los Angeles. And they called themselves Violent 18. Then let's say we got really excited supporting criminals. And we said, hey, these guys are felons. We should deport them back to their home country. We deported them en masse. Telling their home country what they want. And they arrived in the 1990s back in El Salvador. They didn't know Spanish. They didn't know how to hold a job in this new society. And so let's say they started extorting people locally to get the money that they needed. And then they turned it into a business. And let's say they became a transnational criminal organization. We have now declared a terrorist organization. That has caused so much crime in those countries, we have waves of migrants again leaving those countries. See how this all ties together? It all ties together. Okay. Going back to the 1980s, the El Salvadoran government was not doing well against the FDR. They were losing. Then American special forces came in and started giving them good advice and seeing the problems and coming up with solutions for the problems. The El Salvadoran military did not want to go into the hills to fight the FML. They were scared. So, what changed the psychology for them that made them more aggressive? We gave them helicopters. Did I tell you guys this story? We gave them helicopters, and they could have medical evac. Imagine you're in the jungle, and you get shot. It's a flesh wound. You get shot in the arm. What happens to that little man? It's infected. Turns into a nasty infection. Well, what if I could get you on a helicopter back to a hospital after you get shot and have you back in the hospital within 1 hour? Let's say you got shot real bad and you're bleeding out. We can get a tourniquet on you. We can get you on a helicopter, get you back to a medical emergency, military emergency room, and surgery within 1 hour. So you go from seeing your friends die of a stupid big infection to going back and visiting your buddies while he's flipping with the nurses in the hospital, and he's back to combat effectiveness in a month. Or he gets a gold ticket, he doesn't have to go back. How does that change your psychology? You're more willing to engage in combat and follow that FMLN insurgency up into the jungle, up into the hills, and press them. No. If you're in El Salvador, what do you like? There you go, Bruce, she nailed it. Bruce, it's this doughy thing, like meat and cheese. It's delicious. It also cannot be cooked in the jungle, right? An army marches on its feet. So, because they were eating pupusas that had to be like fresh made, they weren't going there. If you want to be an army that's going to engage in counterinsurgency out in the jungle, you got to get yourself used to eating MREs, meals ready to eat. Tell us about MREs, the joys of MREs. Actually, there's a couple that are pretty good. There's something. Describe it physically. Tell everybody what it is. That one. So there's a bunch of these things serve this. And they're built with a bunch of calories, not necessarily good for you, but they charge them. It's the plastic brick, right? Like, and then you open up a package and it's got all kinds of stuff you can make things medium. Like symbols, you get like a couple side, you get side, and then you put water, you can't see, and you put it on the rock and heat up. A lot of people will actually string ramen or just do that. So, okay. So, and how many calories are you in each one of these MRIs? 3,000. 3,000 calories. How many of these can you go through in a day? You're supposed to use, they give you 3 per day. That would be a 9,000 calorie diet. Now that's in excess, right? Yeah. But that's, imagine you were like humping a rug all day, 20 miles, carrying, 100 pounds on your back or whatever, or just trying to breathe in the jungle. Jungle's soft. Um, so a 9,000 calorie. But the idea being that you would be mobile and you have a mobile food source, that you could be out there. Now, 3,000 calories is enough for 1 day, right? So instead of having, 3 per day, you could do one per ration yourself out 1 per day. And you could be fighting effectiveness for weeks at a time up in the hills and have fighting effectiveness. That's a crucible. You're only getting one more year, 3 more years. Tell them how much the crucible is. Last thing. So you have like 3 memories for 3 days. And so you have to ration them out. It's pretty big. Oh, 3,000 calories. 2,000, I can't remember the exact. That's right. It's a lot. It's in the ballpark in that range. But the idea was with a few changes, with these advisors coming in and just identifying these changes, all of a sudden, the El Salvador team was actually doing pretty well against the FMLN. They could not defeat the FMLN, but the FMLN realized something. They could not defeat the it had been going the other way. It looked like the FMLN was just slowly grinding the government down, get them down in big cities, and then eventually be able to surround them. It didn't play out like that. And once the FMLN realized that, they came to the negotiating table and they cut a deal. It was basically saying, hey, you're not going to kill us. You're not going to do this. We are going to enter the government. We're going to be a part of the government. We're going to be another political party. We're going to have this many seats to start off, whatever it was. And there have been El Salvador presidents who were from the FMLN. And I have been in the room with congressmen from the FMLN and the Arena Party. They would joke that they were trying to kill each other in the 1980s. Like, it's amazing. It's been around for 2 like, I'm not trying to shoot it. That's amazing. Now they're in a government together. Things can change. Be amazed, and peace and work and negotiations can work if they're on the right terms. Now, in 1984, there was a CMA helicopter crash in Nicaragua. So this started to alert people like, hey, these white supremacist guys are getting involved and are more involved in these conflicts that we said we weren't going to be a part of. The Boland Amendments 1 through 3 were the Democrats basically passing laws saying, hey, we want to limit how much you're getting involved in Central America as far as communists because we don't want another Vietnam on our hands. Now, I talked to you guys about arms sales to the Iran, which funded the Contras. The CIA referred to these white supremacist types who were acting as mercenaries as disposable assets. They kind of thought they were dumb. The CMA had these border patrols. CMA had links to anti-communism, to anti-immigration. In 1986, we passed the IRCA, and I'm forgetting what it is, but it's one of the last major immigration reform bills we had had in this country. And it had this tremendous impact. You already know people, and you ask members, when they got a path to citizenship, you go back to people's family tree, you guys are going. You go back 1 or 2 generations. In 1986, if you're not living in the United States, and you've been here for years, and you've been paying taxes from your TIN number or whatever it was, and you haven't committed any crimes, you've been in the United States for a certain amount of time, there was this magic moment where you would have a true path to citizenship. Not marriage, not just path to citizenship. And that led to about 1 million people becoming US citizens in the United States. That became known as an amnesty. And for the right-wing Republicans, the MAGA today, that became a dirty word. Because the deal that was cut was, okay, yes, this time we're going to give them amnesty, but now we're going to tighten up. And their view was, we didn't tighten up enough after. It's valid potential critique. We actually got more immigration in the 1990s afterwards. There's an interesting effect, it's a counterintuitive effect. Immigration to the United States from Mexico and Latin America was always cyclical. Here's how it worked. The US economy was good and needed labor. People from Mexico, young, single men, typically, working age, single men, would show up in the United States, work, and when the economy declined, they would go back to their home country. So they'd save their money, go back to Mexico, capitalize a business. I can't tell you how many times. I was in Cuernavaca, living in Cuernavaca in 2007. And I'd be walking to the grocery store, and I'm speaking Spanish nonstop. And all of a sudden, somebody with a Chicago accent would say to me, "Hey, buddy, how's it going?" Knowing I was a Greek. Like, you can't miss it. Like, I'm what was it, right? I stand out. They can tell just by looking at me, I'm a Greek. And I was like, "Where are you from?" And it was super common. There were a lot of Mexicans in Mexico who had spent time in the United States, possibly entered illegally, worked, saved up 5 to 10 grand, and came back to Mexico to capitalize a business. Might be a small business renting out, party supplies or whatever. I ran into a ton of people in that snow. It was very common. That was the story of US Mexico migration. People would come and people would go. In the 1990s, we started really investing in more border security and more immigration enforcement. And I'll talk to you about this. But that had this counterintuitive effect. It actually led to more immigration. Here's what would happen. When the economy was declining, they didn't go back to Mexico. They stayed and rode out the bad economy. Why? Because as you spend more money on border security, it becomes harder to get back in. And you have to pay a smuggler increasingly larger and larger fees, and it becomes more and more dangerous. So it's not like, hey, I know I can come back anytime I want, so I'll just go back to Mexico. No, they started staying there. And when the men stayed there, they were like, oh, I miss my wife. Oh, I miss my kids. I'm never going to get to see my kids. So if I'm not going back, I better bring them here. And then you started to see a shift to settled families. Settled families, oftentimes somebody in the family would marry somebody, get citizenship, whatever, and then they could sponsor them for family members. So in order security reduced immigration, increased it. It increased the number of settled families in the United States. This is not an argument one way or another. This just is. I'm just telling you the facts of how this worked. Right? How this played out. There are these counterintuitive second and third order effects, the consequences of policies. So in 1986, we had our really last major bipartisan immigration reform bill. There was another one in 1996 when they did verify and stuff like that. Is Texas now finally a E-Verify state? So she's because for many years Texas was not. When you apply for a job, they do E-Verify on you now. It's actually a fairly recent phenomenon in the last 10 years. For years, decades, Texas was not an E-Verify state. Why would Texas be not an E-Verify state? Why are they racist? Yes, a lot of their workforce might be not. Is it only for state agencies? Oh, so you can work for McDonald's and they can run an e-verify on you? Oh, we're not really an e-verify state. Still not. Why? Uh, access to cheap labor. The other thing is, e-verify will not change the construction industry. Here's what they're going to do. They're going to call everybody, pay everybody like 1099, all of their own boss during the contract. Every single employee become his own boss. Yeah. No, this will still, they'll still pay taxes on it. Still get paid on it 1099. You know, turn in that 1099 along with the funds. Pay taxes on it. So they're still paying you Social Security, all of that stuff. But they'll just be an independent contractor, and they won't be paying on Social Security. They'll pay off taxpayer. TI? Okay. So it becomes illegal to hire to knowingly hire the undocumented, but if you don't know, you don't have to use the verify system. Come until the 1990s anyway. There's almost no way to enforce this. Okay, so let's go on to the next